resources, and under the resources tab, you'll see this. So then you can reference what I'm ultimately talking about. But I really think that it's important to understand that every single one of these questions on the care sheet matter. Every single one of these questions can help you come up with a solution for the lead that you're speaking with. But I think a lot of us get in the habit of skipping over certain questions, or we're afraid of asking certain questions, and then all of a sudden we run into a think about it, or all of a sudden we run into, I need to talk to my spouse, or I need to talk to my kids, or we get these objections ultimately that prevent us from making more sales. So I thought it would be a smart idea for us really just to break this down for you and why we ask these questions. And when you get an answer to some of these questions, what you can do with these answers to help put yourself in a better position to ultimately make more sales. But I shared this in a group chat yesterday with some folks. Look, even myself, over 3 years in this business, I sat down with the client, went through the care sheet, went to go to quote him, quoted him, went into the application as we got him to pick a coverage amount. And then it dawned on me that I never asked him if he had a Direct Express card or if he had a bank account. Sure as shit, he had a Direct Express card. The company I was quoting him doesn't take Direct Express cards. So I had to take some steps back. I had to re-quote him, and then it was $12 higher than what I was originally quoting him. And all of a sudden his demeanor changed. And so I share that with you because I still make mistakes. And so it's so important for us to make sure that we're asking all these questions. So when we do go to quote, we know it's actually an option that they can get approved for, and that will work for their situation. So ultimately, you guys, what I'm going to do here for you is I'm going to number off the different questions in order of what I ask for. You can go top to bottom, completely okay. I just kind of figured out a way to hop around to make the questions make more sense. So I'm going to go through and number them and then ask the question and then really help you understand why we're asking these questions. So first off, I always start with the name because I think it's important that you take control right away. I always say, state your legal name for me. You can just say, what's your legal name or whatever. To me, I want to take control. This is a doctor-patient type of scenario. So I want them to state to me their legal name. So John, can you state to me your legal name? Let's say he says John C. Smith or John Smith. I'm like, okay, great. Do you have a middle initial? It's obviously a pretty common name, so having a middle initial is going to be important. So let's say he said C, right? So then the second question that I'm going to ask, or where I'm going to put number 2 at, is the age. I don't ever ask for the age. I ask for the date of birth. So I'm like, now, John, what is your date of birth? Let's say he says 1/19 of, let me make it easy on myself, 53. So that guy is going to be 70 years old today, right? And so what I'll say is, now I'm not a math whiz, but how young does that make you? I always ask them how young it makes them because I always want to try to give them a little bit of a compliment. You don't have to, but once again, I'm trying to schmooze them up by my words ultimately. So secondly, I'm going to ask them, what is your date of birth? 1/1953. Okay, awesome. I'm not a math whiz here, John, but how young does that make you? 70. Okay, awesome. Now, the third question I'm going to ask is, now, are you a tobacco user? And then whether he says yes or no, I'm going to mark yes or no. And the reason why it's so important to ask about tobacco usage, because it's going to be a significant difference in price. And then you're also going to get some people who tell you, oh, I quit, or oh, just a pack a day, or 1 cigarette a day. That's still a smoker, you guys. Whether it's 1 cigarette a day, whether it's 1 cigarette a week, Whether it's a cigarette when I'm stressful, they are still a smoker. And it's always important too, if someone tells you that they quit, they've needed to quit outside of 12 months for them to be a non-tobacco user. I don't know of any carriers offhand that ask for 6 months. It's typically going to be a year to make sure that they are a non-tobacco user. And then the fourth question that I'm going to ask you guys is I'm going to dive into the medical conditions. And so the importance of this is that you're going to get an idea of what this client has gone through in their life. And a lot of you are going to run into some people who are like, there's nothing wrong with me, or I'm in perfect health. And then you start diving into the health questions and they give you 4 or 5, 6 different medications. But it's going to be super important that you really dig in to these different conditions. I kind of categorize them so I'm not like one by one by one. And what I mean by categorizing them, I'm going to say, now, if you had a heart attack, stroke, or mini stroke, so now I'm throwing 3 conditions into one, right? So I'm not doing literally every single condition. And let's say he says no to all those. Okay, great. Now, have you ever had any cancer in the past or any current cancer? And it's going to be important that you always ask if they've had a cancer in the past, because some companies are okay with cancer outside of 2 years. Sometimes companies are going to be okay with cancer outside of 5 years. Some companies are going to be okay with cancer outside of 10 years. And so let's say that he said, yes, I had cancer back in 2017. Key question to ask you guys is not necessarily when they got diagnosed, but when was the last treatment? The diagnosis is, of course, important, but we're going to need to know when the last treatment was, because that's really going to be most of the underwriting questions ultimately for the specific product. And so when you're asking about cancer, make sure you get the date of last treatment or the date of last medication that they had taken for cancer. So let's say this guy said 2017, just to give us something here. Now, have you had any stents placed? No. Okay, great. Now, are you a diabetic? And this question is actually going to require you to ask some additional questions. And what I mean by that is, with diabetes, some companies, they care if they were diagnosed before age 50 or after age 50. So it's going to be important to understand how long have you had diabetes? How long have you been diagnosed with diabetes? And then you're going to see in parentheses, it's going to say pills versus insulin. It's important to always ask this question because, once again, some carriers are specific on insulin use and some carriers aren't. So it's going to just be important for you to gather this information so when you put it into the toolkits, you can put they're on insulin and you know the date of their diagnosis. And then it's not, I would say, necessary, but it would be great to even ask them if they know what their last A1C rating is. The measure for the A1C is going to be 8%, pretty much across the board. 8% and below, they're taking care of their diabetes. 8% and higher, their diabetes is taking control of them ultimately. So it's going to be really important that you understand if their diabetes is controlled or uncontrolled, because in toolkits it's going to ask that question. So once again, digging into the diabetes aspect, if they say yes, is going to be important because it's going to really give you a better idea to place the business accordingly that they'll accept. A lot of us ask the bare minimum. We go to place the person with the product and then they get declined, and it's these little nitty-gritty details that really can matter to give you clarity on who will actually get approved with the toolkits. And then the next you're going to see is neuropathy. Now, do you have any diabetic neuropathy or traditional neuropathy? Understand there's two different types of neuropathy. There's diabetic neuropathy and there's just your traditional type of neuropathy. People without diabetes can get neuropathy. A lot of us are under the impression that neuropathy is only associated with diabetes, but it's actually can be diagnosed without diabetes as well. And it's going to be really important that you understand that if they have neuropathy, they're most likely taking gabapentin. So think neuropathy, gabapentin. Always remember that, right? And once again, you're going to want to make sure you put this in the toolkits so then you are getting a clear idea on who will actually approve of these clients. Being a good field underwriter will save you headaches from getting declines and then having to pivot. And I think a lot of us have been in a scenario where we get a decline and then you call the client back and they're like, forget about it. And it's because you didn't do your job to the best of its ability. Now, sometimes clients don't tell us everything, so it's not always our fault. But once again, being a good field underwriter can prevent you from ever having those type of issues. And once again, it's just digging deeper into these questions. High blood pressure is next on the list. I'm just going to be completely honest with you guys right now. High blood pressure isn't a knockout. Now, if they're taking more than 3 high blood pressure medications, they probably got some heart issues or some things kind of going on with their heart. But if they're taking 1 medication or they're taking 2 medications for high blood pressure, it's typically not that big of a deal. So high blood pressure isn't that big of a deal, but you as the field underwriter, you can make it a really big deal. Everything is a really big deal. We don't know if you can get qualified. So then it entices them to ultimately want to see if they can get qualified once again. But I just wanted to be transparent there. The next you're going to see is lupus, RA, rheumatoid arthritis is what RA is going to stand for. Lupus, rheumatoid arthritis isn't the biggest deal in the world, but it can cause them to take pain medications, which sometimes can mess with different underwriting. So once again, it's important to ask all of these questions, you guys. Then asthma, COPD, there's a big difference between asthma and COPD. And let me tell you guys, you're going to get a lot of seniors who tell you they have asthma and they have COPD. So it's just important to really get that clarification ultimately on whether or not they have asthma or whether or not they have COPD. Once again, you'll see in parentheses, albuterol versus cortisone steroid. It's again figuring out whether or not they're on an inhaler or if they're on multiple inhalers, if they're taking a nebulizer, if they're using a nebulizer for the inhalers. That's going to be a question in toolkits when you put in COPD, and that will ultimately eliminate some carriers if they are using the nebulizer. So everything, all those additional questions you see in toolkits, if you mess around with it, it's really important that you answer those questions correctly, because that will really eliminate some carriers from popping up as an option, and it can eliminate some carriers if you're answering them correctly. So you want to make sure, once again, being a good field underwriter. And then ask about thyroid. People can have hypothyroid. Once again, it's not the biggest deal in the world, but it is important for us because sometimes mixed in with other medications, it can cause some companies to decline. Anxiety, depression, great question to ask. Always ask that question. And you will get people out there, you guys, that will say they have anxiety or depression and they actually have bipolarness. So once again, it's important to really understand what those medications they're taking for anxiety and depression, because someone who's taking anxiety medications versus someone who's taken bipolar medications, they're going to be able to qualify for different products. So just understanding that bipolarness, mental illnesses can get incorporated with anxiety or depression. So it's always important to get those medications so you can get a better understanding. And then kidney liver disease, obviously super important to ask that question. And then the dementia or Alzheimer's. And you guys, I've had it happen. And I imagine some other people have had it happen. you talk to someone who has Alzheimer's or dementia, they tell you they don't have it, and then all of a sudden it pops up on their report. One thing that I think is great to add into your question asking, ultimately, if they say they don't have Alzheimer's or they don't have dementia, you just got them sometimers, right? I think Connor heard me say that to him, and that dude asked every single person, and he laughs every single time. And it's a great way just to once again break down that barrier of rapport building, right? You can get them to chuckle, you can get them to laugh, you can get them to make a comment, so it's not as serious. Um, and again, you don't have to utilize it. Connor uses it every single time and he loves it. So after I'm going to go through the medical questions, you guys, number 5 question I'm going to personally ask is medications. And I think it's really important, you guys, when a senior tells you that they take 1 or 2 medications, it's great to believe them, but I'm always going to question that, because a lot of times people may not tell you a medication that they're taking, or sometimes they may not take a medication because they don't like how it makes them feel, but they're prescribed to it. Or 6 months ago they were taking the medication, but they're no longer prescribed. So I always like to dig in a little bit deeper here. So after they give me their medication list, I'm always going to ask them, now, is there any medications that you used to take that you no longer take? Or are there any medications that you didn't like how they make you feel, so you just don't take them? And it's a great way to dig in a little bit deeper to give you, once again, a clear idea on where you're going to go with the options. So once again, I'll reiterate that if they're only telling you 1 or 2 medications, I'm always leery of that. And so I'm always want to dig in a little bit deeper. Is there any medications that you used to be prescribed that you no longer take? Or are there any medications that you were prescribed, but you don't like how they make you feel, so you don't take them? As weird as it sounds, you may get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more medications from these individuals. So the next question I'm going to ask you guys is surgeries, and be very clear. Surgeries in the last 5 years. You say surgeries. Well, I had a surgery when I was 6 years old to get my tonsils taken out. Like, we don't need to know that, right? We need to know in the last 5 years, in relevant time, have they had any major surgeries? Um, so then you can obviously put that into the toolkits as well. If it's a major surgery, open heart surgery, or a stent placement, there's different types of surgeries that people have that you want to make sure that you're understanding with. The 7th question that I'm going to ask here, you guys, is their family situation. Now, how I ask this myself is that I say, obviously, if you're sitting down with someone and their wife's there, I'm not going to ask them if they're single, married, or widowed. But for you guys doing things over the phone, I think it's always really important for you to understand, are you single, married, or widowed? I had to start adding in the widow because I started getting a lot of seniors to tell me, oh, I'm widowed. So I wanted to cover that basis. Are you single, married, or widowed? And so this is going to be important, because this section right here, you guys, is actually where I'll start to try to build a little bit of rapport, or get them to talk and tell me a little bit about their family. So after I asked him if they're single, married, or widowed, let's say he said single, I'm saying, now, do you have any adult children or any grandbabies? And so I started saying adult children, because when I said children or kids, they're like, they're adults. Once again, I started adjusting the way I started asking questions based off of the answers I was getting. So I'm gonna ask them now, do you have any adult children or any grandbabies? And let's say they have 2 kids. Okay, great. Are they here locally, or do they live locally, or are they kind of spread out everywhere, or do they live in a different state? The reason why I asked this question, you guys, is because if John has a child, he lives here in Texas, but he has a child in New York City, something that no one really thinks about, and something you can bring up to your client is that kid out of the blue, out of nowhere, is going to have to book a flight, take time off of work to get down to make these final arrangements or come to the house and clean it out. And so it's important to understand if someone is going to be flying the next day or within the next 2 days, you're talking about $500,000, $1,500 flights. And if they have a family, that's 4 or 5 of those flights. That could be $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. Once again, giving you more ammunition or more knowledge on presenting a coverage amount that makes sense. Some parents will want to make sure that they assist with that time off or the unexpected flights out of the blue. So once again, it's great. It's a great question to ultimately dig into, so you get a better understanding in creating the need, and really providing them a solution. One thing I really, really love is to ask about their grandbabies. As weird as this sounds, there's a lot of parent-child relationships out there that are poor or bad, or they're not on speaking terms, but they absolutely love their grandbabies. And so I would always say, now, have you been blessed with any grandbabies? And I'm always smiling, and I'm looking at them in their eyes about it, because typically when you ask them about their grandbabies, it lights them up, or they want to talk about it. Yeah, I got 4 of them. Okay, awesome. They live here locally, or are they out in a different state? Once again, asking that question so you can build the need and understand their situation further, right? So um, I always ask them if they're local. Oh, great. Do you get to see them often, or you only get to see them a couple of times of the year? It's giving the lead or the person the opportunity to talk about something they care about, or something that they really love, or the grandbaby that they admire. So this is kind of where I spend a little bit of extra time to try to build a little bit more rapport building. Because they get most people love their family, so they'll talk about their family for a couple minutes, right? So after I asked about their family, which is the 7th question that I ask, I'm going to ask about their occupation. Now, are you still working? Are you retired? Are you disabled? And the reason I'm asking this question, you guys, is because a person that I'm sitting down with or speaking to that's working is going to be a little bit of a different conversation than someone who is on disability, and even someone who is on just Social Security. And the reason being is someone who's working is probably going to have a little bit more income than a person who is retired or living on disability. And then important to understand about the disability aspect. If they're on disability, they're on a fixed budget. So you're going to be dealing with that. So why not address that when they say they're on disability? Now, I'm assuming you're living on that fixed budget, right? And now let's say they're living off their Social Security. Now, do you have any pensions or any retirement plans, or is it just that Social Security? And then after I figure out, let's say he's disabled, I'm gonna say, now after they take out whatever they may take out, what are you netting on a monthly basis? So the monthly income is going to be the 9th question that I ask here. And I think it's going to be very, very important that you always know at least ballpark what their monthly income is, so then you can give them the proper solution to their problem, aka the amount of coverage. Someone making $980 a month and you show them a $150 a month policy, probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Once again, it goes back to being a good field underwriter, you guys. So let's say he said disability, and he's pulling in $930 a month. Okay, great. Now this is where I'm going to ask them, now are you renting or are you owning? And so that's going to be where this equity portion is at. And we need to get that updated to just say rent and own instead of the equity aspect. But this is where I'm going to ask them, do you rent or do you own? And it's going to be important that you understand this, you guys, because if someone who is renting and their rent is 750 a month and they're making 930, you know you're working with a very slim budget. So this gives you a great gauge ultimately on what you're going to be presenting to the client based off of their rent or their mortgage. Typically that's going to be the biggest expense for these folks. And so let's say that he said rent. Okay, great. Now what is that typically running you each month? And some people are like, why do you need to know that? Well, I need to understand what the best solution is for your problem here. I'm not trying to show you something that you can't afford. That makes zero sense. So helping me understand what your monthly expenses are will give me a better idea on what our options are going to be for you. If they give you any pushback, typically they don't. It's all about how you ask the questions and the tonality that you have in your question asking. So let's say that he says $600 a month. Okay, no problem. Now, as far as additional bills, utilities, whatever, car payments, whatever. Now, would you say, I like to throw out suggestions. One thing about giving a suggestion, I don't even know if that's a proper word to be using here, but throwing out a suggestion on how much they're paying, what is the natural thing for someone to do when you ask them something that's not correct? They're going to correct you with the right answer. And so I like to say, now with your utilities, is that like an extra 100 a month, or is that like 200 a month, or are you like 500 a month? And then by you throwing out those different numbers, they're typically going to spit back out whatever um, whatever amount it is. You know, oh, it's like 150, or no, it's more like 200, or it's more like 100. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking the rent plus whatever the utility is or their expenses are and combining that, so I know exactly how much money they're spending to live. And it's really important to understand that, because what they live on and what is their disposable income are two different things. The expenses, that's something that's going to be constant and not go away. What they use on their disposable money, that's something that you can have a conversation with them with to better understand. And so, okay, John, is it safe to say all your bills wrapped together is about $700 a month? Does that sound about right? Yes. Okay, great. So is it safe to say you have maybe around $230 left over as disposable income each month, or is it a little bit more, or a little bit less? Once again, I'm giving out suggestions for them to correct me, and this is the money that you're looking at for premium. So if someone's only making $230 as their disposable income after they pay bills, we're using the method of 3%, 5%, 8% of their income towards insurance. Once again, you giving out those percentages, a lot of times people have never even thought about those percentages before or put into relevance. And then it also gives you ground to lean back onto. And what I mean by that is if they say, oh, that's too expensive. John, with all due respect, that's 3% of your monthly income. I know you said at the beginning of this you wanted to make sure you weren't a burden to your family, but now what you're telling me is you're not even willing to put 3% of your income towards your burial. I'm very confused. It gives you kind of ground to overcome the objection and to get them to vomit on you of like what's going on, or oh, I got to pay this, or I got to pay that. So once again, the quality of your questions is going to determine the quality of your business here. So as you guys are going to see, you're going to see 401k, IRA, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, CDs, significant savings. This is a way to get an understanding of their situation. How I ask the question is, do you have anything that acts as life insurance, such as 401ks, IRAs, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, something that would be passed on to somebody in the event of you passing away? It's always going to be important for you to ask this question, you guys. I don't know a thing about annuities, but we have a team of individuals that do. You don't need to know anything about annuities. You just need to get really good at asking this question to uncover the money. And if someone says they do have, let's say old 401k, ballpark range of what's in there, is it like 50 a month or 50,000? Is it like 150,000? once again, I'm never asking someone a question that will offend them. And a question that may offend somebody is, how much you got in your 401k? And it's like, no. Now, do you have 50,000, 100,000, 300,000? Once again, you're throwing out suggestions, so then they correct you. The brain operates in correcting somebody when they're throwing out incorrect numbers. So just keep that in mind when you're asking these different questions. Now, you'll see significant savings. A lot of people will say that they don't have significant savings. Significant is going to be different for everybody, you guys. Someone who's on a small income compared to someone who's on a big income, I imagine their significance is going to be different. But it's always important to understand how much they actually have, because you can identify if you're dealing with someone who lives by the skin of their teeth and they spend every single dollar they have, or you're going to identify someone who's actually somewhat smart with their money and saving up a little bit of money. How I typically would ask this question, so it's in a least non-aggressive way. Now, as far as your savings go here, John, in relevance to your monthly expenses. So once again, important to understand their monthly expenses, so then you have the ability to lean onto that. So let's say it's $700. So in relative to your expenses, which is $700 a month, for your savings, would you say you have a month or 6 months or like a year's worth of savings to pay for your monthly expenses? Oh no, I don't have anything in my savings. Oh, I probably have like 3 months, or oh, I probably have 6 months. And I just started asking it that way in relevance to their expenses. So then I'm not asking them how much they have in their savings. I'm asking how much they have in their savings relative to their expenses. And I got less pushback asking it that way. So that's why I figured I share it with you. But once again, if you don't know what their monthly expenses are, you don't have any ground to kind of lean on to. So once again, all these questions matter. So, John, in relevance to your monthly expenses with your savings, would you say you have a month or 3 months or a year's worth of your expenses with your savings? And then you can write down 3 months or 6 months, and then you can do the mental math, or do the math on the side. Take 700 times 3, you got about $2,000 in the savings, right? So I just wanted to really emphasize on that, because I think a lot of us are hesitant to ask about someone's savings because we may have gotten an objection of why you need to know that. And it's just like, I need to understand that if you were to die and you're relying on I have that in my savings can pay for my burial. You always hear people say that. So once again, I'm trying to overcome an objection before it ever comes. So that's why I'm trying to understand their savings, so then I have ground to stand on. So that would be question 11, is about their retirement there. Question number 10 or 12 that I'm going to ask is, are you enrolled in a Medicare plan? Another great way to ask it is, who do you use for your health insurance? And once again, I know majority of you guys are working final expense, and I know majority of you guys aren't asking people about their health insurance. You can go from a no sale to an enrollment by asking this question. And if you're not AHIP ready, if you're not contracted with Medicare, find someone on the team who is and become referral partners. When you ask this question and they say, I'm on Humana, or I'm with United, or I have Medicare. Okay, great. Who do you have your Medicare with? Jotting down Humana, writing down Aetna, writing down United Healthcare. Okay, awesome. I just want to let you know, we not only help people with their life insurance, but we also help people with their health insurance, specifically through Medicare. Now, this is for someone who's not obviously appointed or licensed to sell Medicare. Now, I have a team that specializes in the Medicare, and they'd be more than happy to set up a review to make sure that you're getting all the benefits that are entitled to you. Or if you are appointed, ready to sell with Medicare, now I help people with their health insurance needs as well. Be more than happy to conduct a review of your plan to make sure that you're getting all the benefits that you're entitled to. Once again, You can go from a no sale to an enrollment. And to me, you guys, I'm trying to make these leads work. I know how we got to make every single lead work because sometimes we're battling with our budget and we're battling with our low income. So I'm trying to find a solution to this person I'm talking to, whether it's life insurance, whether it's health insurance, whether it's a cancer plan, whether it's a hospital indemnity plan. We have access to a variety of different ancillary products as well. And so the more value you can provide to somebody, or the more credibility you can provide to the client, the more likely they'll want to work with you, or the more likely that they'll open up to you. So don't sleep on asking about their health insurance. I can't emphasize that enough.
Another thing, Gage. Oh, can you guys hear me okay? I just wanted to piggyback on that. And if you do, pass a lead over to somebody who is in Medicare, that person might be super grateful towards you, the life agent, because you tossed her to a Medicare agent. But now the next time she, comes across somebody looking for life insurance, might even refer you, the life agent, to that person. So just wanted to throw that.
Yes, you're planting seeds. You're planting seeds, you guys. I appreciate that, Mar. So the 13th question I'm going to ask here, you guys, is do you have any life insurance? I think it's always going to be important to understand if you're dealing with someone who has coverage versus someone who doesn't have coverage. Obviously, if you find someone who has life insurance, it's actually a really good thing because you identified a buyer. You identified someone who's already went through this process. You identified somebody who believes in the importance of having life insurance. So it's actually a really good thing if they do have life insurance. I think a lot of us are like, shit, or I'm trying to replace it or whatever. You kind of get these things in your mind that it's a negative thing when it's actually a positive thing. It's actually much easier to talk to somebody who's already purchased life insurance than trying to convince somebody to try to buy life insurance or convince them the importance of it. You can go back and forth with somebody like that. So I want you guys to understand that it's actually a positive thing if they do have life insurance. So it's going to be important that you ask, understanding what type of coverage it is, if it's term or whole life. I'm going to tell you right now, you guys, every single person is going to say it's whole life. And they got a term. They got a term policy. I've heard it 100 times. I got whole life. And then I start asking some more questions as far as coverage amount, premium amount, and that will give you a clear idea on whether or not it's whole life or term. So if someone says, yeah, I have a policy. Okay, great. Do you know how much coverage it is? 250,000, 100,000, 50,000. Really anything over 50,000, you guys, my head goes to term. And then how you can really decide or filter through whether or not it's going to be term or if it's going to be whole life. Number one, how long have they had it? But number two, the premium amount. If someone says they have 250,000 and they're paying $57 a month and they say it's whole life, I'm telling you right now, it's not whole life. They may be under the impression that it's whole life, but someone paying someone who has 250,000 and they've had, and their premium amount's $57, and they've had the coverage for 10 years and they're 64, means they got it when they're 54. We should all know or have a general idea of what whole life prices are going to cost. So if someone at 54 got a $250,000 policy, does anyone on here think that would be a whole life policy for $57 a month? I don't think so. Like I just trying to use common sense here, you guys, to put pieces together, because a lot of times you guys, these clients, leads, whatever you want to call it, they are very, very confused on term and whole life. Yes, you're right, David. That's why I asked, how long have you had the, oh, I've had the policy since I was in my 20s. Yeah, I've had the policy since I was a kid. Now that makes more sense for a coverage amount being a whole life type of plan. But us just believing them that it's a whole life policy, you got to stop doing that and ask a couple more questions to clarify that up. I'm telling you, the amount of times people have told me they had whole life when they had term, I've lost count the amount of times that has happened to me. And a lot of times, you guys, that is great leverage for you to help them enroll into another policy or help them buy another policy, because it's going to come with an end date. There's a lot of term policies out there that go to age 70 or go to age 80, and they either expire or they 10x the premium amount that originally was. So once again, just understanding the types of life insurance out there will help you when you ask this question. That's why I just want to dig into it a little bit deeper. Obviously, if they say yes, you want to know who, how much. If they don't have any, the 14th question I'm going to ask is the beneficiary. And it's important for you to understand who the beneficiary is and the name of the beneficiary. So then now you can start saying the beneficiary's name to the lead, to the client. And the reason I say that is you want to make sure they're actually listening to you. So when you're talking about their loved one, you're talking about their beneficiary. And let's say John's beneficiary is Hannah. Okay, Hannah. Now, what does this look like for Hannah? Now, does Hannah know you're looking at this and you're getting people to engage more into what you're actually saying? You're making them become an active listener by saying the beneficiary's name as many times as you can. I was always taught to say the beneficiary's name 7 times throughout the presentation or throughout the entire time I was sitting with the individual. So use that as a rule of thumb. Try to say the beneficiary's name 7 times. Keep track. Say their name over and over. It's their pain point. This is an emotional sale. So find the pain point, find the person that they're trying to protect, and press down on that pain point to drive the emotion so then they can make a decision. Because without any emotion in your presentation, I promise you there'll be no motion in putting an application. So a rule of thumb is you want to make this an emotional type of thing so they can make a decision. Because if it's transactional, it's just about numbers and they need to think about it and they need to see it incorporated into their budget. But if it's an impact or if it's a solution to their worry, then they're going to not care what the price is. It's the solution that they care about. The price tag doesn't matter. If you knew that you needed to get a kidney transplant, you don't care what the price of the kidney transplant is. You care about finding the damn kidney donor that you can utilize. So just keep that in mind as well. And then the last question, you guys, that I'm going to ask on here, actually, there's 2 more. The next question I'm going to ask is, do you have a will in place? And the reason I asked this question is because I utilized this question to figure out whether or not they had a bank account, a credit union account, or a direct express. And how I would word it is, now, John, do you have a will in place? Most people are going to say no. Now, if you're someone that says yes, or I have a trust set up, you're probably talking to a more responsible individual, understanding that as well too. And so let's say they said, no, I don't have a will in place. Okay, no worries, sir. I want to give you this website. It's called doyourownwill.com. I literally used to have this on my business card because it was so incorporated into my presentation. So then I could figure out if they had a bank account. So I knew if when I was going to quote, I was quoting direct express carriers, or if I was going to quote any of the carriers. And so once I said doyourownwill.com, it's a free online service where you can get a last will put in place. Now, John, do you bank with a bank or a credit union? And you asked them about the will, you provided them value that they didn't ask for, and then you slid in, do you bank with a bank or a credit union? And the reason I asked that question is because they can take it down to their bank or their credit union to get it notarized. Now let's say, yeah, I have a bank. Okay, great. You could take it on down to your bank and get it notarized by a notary down at your bank. Now I'm right in here, bank, where it says last updated. Now that I know they have a bank. Or if they say, no, no, I don't have one. Oh, gotcha. You got one of those green Direct Express cards? Yeah, I got one. Okay, no worries. The reason I said that is because you could have taken it down to a bank or credit union to get it notarized. So once again, I used to get all the objections that you're getting, but I would ask these questions to try to prevent any objections from coming up. And so I asked this guy yesterday, you guys, if he had a will in place, and he didn't. And I gave him the doyourownwill.com, and I forgot to ask him if he had a bank or a credit union. So I still made the mistake, and then it cost me ultimately the sale because I didn't ask that question. So I still make mistakes. I'm not asking you to be perfect. It's okay. But the last question I'm going to ask, the 16th question is, do you have any unsecured debts? And this is going to give you leverage, you guys, on building higher coverage amounts, which ultimately will lead you to more premium, which will ultimately give you more commission. So asking about credit cards, asking about loans, asking about medical bills, all of these things will matter because it will build the value and the importance of getting higher coverage amounts. So after I've asked them all 16 of these questions here, that's when I'm going to go into toolkits and plug it into toolkits. Some of you guys may be doing that simultaneously. Kudos to you. I'm not a multitasker, but I typically just do a quick review of what I've discussed in what I've discovered on the care sheet and just ask them, am I missing anything that you can think of that we didn't address? And then from there, you guys, is where I will go into the quoting tool. And I just wanted to take today to break this down to each one of you and why I ask each of these questions. Each of these questions is going to give you a clear idea on what you're going to quote the individual or what options you're going to look at. And so don't skip over any of these questions, you guys. I think all of these questions are relevant to the individual. And if they give you any pushback, you can just say, I have to understand your situation clearly so I can give my best professional recommendation. And just stand on that ground, you guys, because you will get some people who will ultimately why do you need to know that? Or why are you asking so many questions? And you got to tell them that all these questions matter in giving you the proper plan to cover your family. So I hope you guys got some type of value out of this. I appreciate the 26 of you that stayed on here the entire time to listen to why I asked these questions and in order I asked these questions. If you're selling at a high level, keep doing your thing.